So, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of P.A.R. Real Talk. My name is Pali. Welcome to Power Radio. And as usual, bringing incredible guests from all over the world. And today I have Tony Aguilar on the show. If I could get you to please tell us a bit about yourself, tell us where you're from, and tell us about this great book of yours, which I'm not going to let out the bag.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show today. And I've written a book called Is America Broken or Has It Always Been This Way? And I wrote the book because of an article that I had read in 2024, which was entitled, Why is Joe Biden Struggling? Because America is Broken. And this was a New York Times article written. And I did take some exception to that. I'm not disagreeing that there are parts of America that need to be fixed. But it seemed to me that that was not the only reason, because some of the issues that America has been going through, it has been going through for decades, if not centuries. The other reason I had written the book was to create a counter narrative to the response that Americans often hear, particularly from politicians, in light of violence, anti-Semitism, racism, and things of that nature, where politicians will say, this is not who we are. And the reality is our history says otherwise. This is who we are. It's not all of who we are. America has done great things, but it is a part of the American DNA. So I did want to lay that out and create a counter narrative to that often heard statement of this is not who we are.
Mm, Great, great answer. Thank you for the opening. And when you began to write this book, did you have, were you trying to answer this question for yourself, or were you just trying to educate the masses?
Well, both and, because I think when you do a book of this nature, you do have to do research. So there was a lot of research that went into the book. So I talked about things such as religion, the culture wars, the military, race, and the economy, and things of that nature. So there was research that did go into the book. And I think, when you do a book like this, it's not good to necessarily start with something that you're trying to prove, but see where the facts lead you. And one thing I did notice is that we, again, as I've said, we have done great things, but there's also things that we need to acknowledge so that we don't repeat them. George Centennial says, if you don't remember the past, you're deemed to repeat them. So I just wanted to lay that out for the public to understand that sometimes we can call ourselves schizophrenic in terms of who we are as Americans.
Yeah, that's a true answer. Thank you. And kind of this bit. So your background is in communication and media.
My
Um,
background is actually in community organizing.
yes, that's
And so I spent a number of years in community organizing, but I've been in the non-profit world for about 30 years. So I've seen these things from different perspectives, and I wanted to lay that out as well.
mm, great. So you're definitely the right person to answer the question. Um, so my next question is America truly broken, or are we just seeing long existing cracks more clearly now?
I think we are seeing cracks more clearly now, with the advent of social media and all of that. There are a lot of things that are a lot more visible that people might not have recognized years ago. But America being broken, I think we're kind of in a transitionary period with the president administration and things that are happening. So I do think we are going to see a pendulum swing. Those of you who are in the United Kingdom might remember that a couple of weeks ago we had an election, and the election went toward the Democrats, and that kind of shows a pendulum swing. And you do see this in a lot of nations. Poland, for example, went to the right, but he came back to the middle. The Netherlands rejected their anti-immigrant party under Geert Wilders. Even in the United Kingdom, you had the Tories and now you have Labour. So I think nations do undergo pendulum swings. And I think the United States will also undergo a pendulum swing. We'll see what happens next year. But I do believe if history is any indication, we will undergo a pendulum swing.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll just, as you say, we just have to wait and see, but everything is looking like it. And in, you've kind of covered a bit more of this, but I'll ask you anyway, that in recent events, have there been any kind of moments that convinced you that the system is not actually functioning as it should?
Well, for example, I think, depending upon where people are, let's say with the LGBTQ community, there was a challenge to the Obergefell decision, which in America made same-sex unions legal. That was re-challenged, but the Supreme Court has decided not to take that up. So that's kind of a sign that, maybe things can go on the right way. In terms of brokenness, I'm not sure it's brokenness as opposed to decisions being made in an intentional manner. And as a result, women lost the right to choose. But you also have a system in which you have a case now called Louisville Calais, which will essentially obliterate the Civil Rights Act from 1965. You also have a situation in which Nome versus Vasquez Perdomo, which essentially allowed profiling to take place, which is why you see ICE doing what it does. So now, I'm not sure I would call that being broken. That is a consequence of deliberate decisions being made by the population as well as political leaders. So if that's broken, if you're on the opposite side of those decisions, yes, you may see it as being broken. But if you voted for that, you would not. So it really depends on where you are in the political spectrum.
That's very thoughtful. Thank you. And do you believe that the problem is political or cultural or actually moral?
I think it's a combination of the three, in the sense that everything that happens has a political aspect to it. Culture has been a prevailing sentiment in the United States for years, for centuries. Whether you go back to Jefferson's notion of an agrarian society versus Hamilton's notion of an urban society. So we've always had this. So we've always had kind of a cultural aspect to the debates that we have in the nation. However, I think politically, that is where these things get resolved. So folks who are not engaged in the political process ultimately give up their opportunity to decide where we're going to go culturally and or where we're not going to go culturally. So everything's been cultural, political, and sometimes moral. I mean, for example, I think the idea of arresting people who may be deemed to be an illegal immigrant, but also finding out that we're arresting people who are legal in this country is an issue of morality. And I think there are people who have obviously pointed to that. Pope Leo has spoken on that. Bishop Buddy from the Episcopal Church in Washington has spoken on that. Bishop William Barber has spoken on that. So I do think there is a moral aspect to this, but it gets worked out for good or bad through politics.
Great. Thank you so much for your answer. And you spoke about earlier that, okay, media, social media and, technology generally has kind of helped us see more of the cracks. Do you think actually the media landscape has helped or hurt America's sense of truth?
I think it depends on where you're looking. So if you're looking at, we have three major cable stations. We have MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Well, if you listen to Fox News, and it's not that Fox News is always wrong, but Fox News will tend to be more to the right. MSNBC will tend to be more to the left. CNN tries to cut it both ways. So I think it really depends on where you're getting your information from, because we are living in an age where disinformation is rampant right now. And so there is no agreement on what are the true facts when it comes to any particular issue. And this goes back to Kellyanne Conway, who talked about alternative facts. So that's a problem. And how that gets resolved, it is an issue. But I think it depends on where you get your news and your information from.
Mm-hmm. That's always true, because media these days, I think everybody just wants to sell the news. So it's whoever is catchy the most, that's what you get. And unfortunately, some people only get the title. They don't actually even dive through to find out what the article is about. And the caption will always be the thing that will get you hooked the most, which is, yeah, that's just a new world
Oh,
we're in.
absolutely. There's an old saying in media, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you have violence, if you have any of that, it's going to be the lead story. But I think there are alternatives to that. And I think, people, I think more and more are trying to look for ways to get information without receiving propaganda from either side. And I think it's going to take a while, but I do think that's going to come into fruition probably sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably, hopefully sooner than later. Um, and you've written your book. There are journalists out there, there are communicators out there. What responsibilities do you think they can bring? So how do you feel they can all bridge together to make sure we're actually giving only the right information?
Well, that's the $1 million question, because if you are making your money based on disinformation, then it's hard to create an incentive to say, let's give the right information. So in the last election, or in 2020, for example, when the present president had lost the election, but there are news networks who were saying he won and they still carrying his water. And so it's hard to say what would make them come at it from a different perspective. Now, what did happen was that they were sued by, Dominion, and that cost them a lot of money. So they're probably less able to report wrong information now, and have a less of an incentive to report wrong information now. But it is still difficult, because right now you have networks such as CBS, which has paid out a lot of money to the Trump administration. You have ABC, which paid out money to the Trump um, administration for in order to avoid, let's say, a lawsuit that would keep them in court, or because he had sued them for defamation of character. Now, the reality is, had they gone to court, they probably would have won their case. But in order to avoid all of that, they paid out a lot of money. So it remains to be seen what is going to be the incentive for news networks to really report the news and to hold people accountable on either side of the political spectrum. So that's a difficult question. And right now, because media is owned by major corporations and they have to make a profit, I would say I would be hard pressed to really figure out what is going to drive them to really begin to be an institution of accountability, as opposed to what they are now.
mm, no, definitely get what you mean. I think from kind of on the listeners spectrum, and when we look at these people, we're going, oh yeah, you always you're not reporting the right information, but then yeah, if reporting the right information gets them prosecuted and they lose money from their business, you can kind of see why.
Mhm.
But let me throw the question back to you that
Exactly.
if you could make one
Mhm.
systematic change to fix America, what would it be?
Well, there's not one change. It because I think we have to because everything ultimately devolves into politics. You have, 400 some odd congressional leaders who have to represent their constituents. All of these constituents have different opinions and judgments about what can happen is key leadership needs to figure out how to speak in terms words of not togetherness. We're not looking for a kumbaya moment here because people will disagree on issues, and that's fine. But I think when certain things happen, we need our political leaders to not fan the flames of division, but speak in terms of where we're together. Because the American people, quite frankly, at this stage of the game, even with all of the division, we're not as divided as people think. And I think if you're running for office now, people will speak in divisive terms because they're trying to get elected. But the reality is, if you look at it now, the last election that took place last week, there were counties that were red that went blue. So I do think that it really depends on the issue and it depends on the person running for office, but it also depends on leadership at the very top and to understand that we're not as divided as we think we are. That's probably more propaganda than anything else.
Mm, thank you so much for that answer. Um, and let's ask you this be as well that what lesson do you think other countries can learn from America's struggles?
That's a good question. I think there's an old Christmas song called "Little Town of Bethlehem," and the lyrics are, "All our hopes and fears through all the years are met in Thee tonight." And what happens is, whenever we get charismatic leaders, there's a population that tends to think that their hopes are going to be met through that leader and their fears are going to be resolved through that same leader. And I think what this means is to really change the paradigm of voting. So rather than look for the charismatic leader, we need to look for folks who are quite frankly competent, well spoken, charismatic leader, which would tend to lead more times to disappointment than not. So I would say to folks that they need to be cognizant of the fact that let's not look for the Messiah. Let's not look for the charismatic leader, but who's someone that can basically lead the government or lead a government in a way that's competent and that benefits the majority of the people or the optimum amount of people as possible of American politics, but I think other nations as well. The other thing is to be prepared to fight for those institutions which keep government accountable. And I think so, for example, in 2016, when a lot of people did not vote, and as a result, they got three justices that took away the right to choose. we got profiling, and all of this. Well, we need to be engaged in how we vote, and also in terms of holding politicians accountable, and also to be informed as to what the real issues are. So, and I think that's the advice that I would give to a lot of countries now, understanding that a lot of countries do not have the system that America has. So America, quite frankly, even with the turmoil that it may be going through now, is still, as a nation, still able to hold its elected officials accountable. Many nations do not have that. So I'd be hard pressed to try to give a nation that doesn't have that advice as to how to get there. And it'll be very difficult.
Mm. Thank you so much for the answer. Well, Willie, okay, we'll take that on board. And kind of talk about your book quickly. Like in one sentence, how would you personally answer your own question? Is America broken or has it always been this way?
I would answer that America has always been this way. And that if you look at the issues that we are facing, we've been facing these issues for generations, whether it's the economy, whether it's wealth disparities, whether it's race, whether it's militarization of of our cities, culture wars. So I would say we've been in this situation for a long, long time. What is happening now is that it is obviously more emphatic right now. But I would say overall, we've been like this for a long, long time. I think as we read American history, we will find that when people call, let's say, for a time when politics was more genteel, when politics was more peaceful, well, if you look at politics hundreds of years ago, let us not forget that we had Alexander Hamilton get killed by Aaron Burr. Let us not forget that we had congresspersons fight on the floor. So we've always had this. The difference is now that we seem to be more aware of it now. But these things have always been there. We've always had issues of who can vote, which led to the civil rights movement. We've always had issues with immigration in terms of the Chinese Exclusion Act and deportation of Mexicans under Hoover. Um, so we've always had these issues, but we keep repeating these things. So part of what I would hope is that people would learn from history and learn how not to repeat what has gone on in the past.
That's really positive. And not even just to the country. I think that's just to everybody, individual. And I suppose that's how the country changed. One, everybody do their own bit, and yeah, we can definitely make a difference.
Exactly.
And let's cover this bit as some time is running out.
Mm-hmm.
How can people follow your work? How can they? The book is on most of uh, distribution networks, but where's the best place for people to reach out to you?
Well, the book they can buy on Amazon as well as Barnes and Noble. So they can go to those two places, again, Barnes and Noble and Amazon. But also they can follow me on Twitter, and if you go to my website, uh, which is cmcgmedia.com, they can follow me on there as well. Where I also have my podcast, which I do, as well as a weekly column that I do on various issues in the United States. So they can follow me on that. And be glad to engage with them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And kind of let's if you I'm not sure, maybe something in the planning yet, but if you wrote a sequel, what would it focus on? Will it be, or what would be the title? If you wrote
Title
a
would be, or the focus would be, how I would use my community organizing experience. How do you move from one state to another. In other words, how do you move from what may be deemed as a broken nation to a well nation? How do you move from a dysfunctional democracy to a functional democracy? So if I was to do a sequel, it would probably be in that.
It's really nice because now you've gone done the research, but now you're presenting the solution. Like, there you go. That's
Yep,
your skill. That's
absolutely.
great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And kind of want to ask this question: that how do you hope readers feel after they finish reading your book? Do you think they will feel angry, reflective, motivational, or something
I
else?
hope reflective, and I hope reflective in the sense that would make them want to do their own research to follow up on some of the issues that we've talked about in the book. So I hope people again would be reflective, but also to be um, have a hunger for getting engaged in what's going on in their nation. So regardless of whether they're angry or not, I hope it leads people to becoming more involved in what goes on in the country.
Great, great, great. Thank you so much. And any kind of closing remarks for you to our viewers?
No, I think again, want to thank you for having me on the show. I just want people to be engaged, to do their own reading, to find out what's really going on, whether good or bad, and then to act accordingly. And to think about how their action or non-action has consequences for the nation. And that's what I hope people will take away from the book.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much for that. Yes, so I would like to say thank you so much for coming on the show. It's not an area that I know too much about, but thrown a lot of information at me. I have to watch this back and do my own research, as I hope others will as well. And yeah, hopefully we can catch up again pretty soon on one of your next projects. But yeah, until then, it's been a pleasure. Take
Thanks for
care.
having me. I appreciate being on the show.
Bye bye.
You're traveling on the airwaves of Power Ace Radio.